This is Monica Perez, and we are here with part 5 of our reading and discussion of the book Mass Control: Engineering Human Consciousness by Jim Keith, a great conspiracy researcher. So we've already got 4 in the can, and we're up to chapter 9. But last episode, so it was part 4 of this series, it was mentioned in here Sirhan having some kind of satanic connection. So Sirhan is the guy who's in jail for killing Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Sr., whose wife just died this week at the age of 96, having buried 2 children and a grandchild. Sounds like my mom, 2 kids and 2 grandkids. But Sirhan, a lot of people think he was MK Ultra, the mind control subject, but I don't remember hearing this about him having anything to do with the occult. Then I don't know how it came up. I was reading the wiki entry on him, the early life, and I'm going to read the whole thing first. It's not that long. It's Sirhan Bashara Sirhan was born into a Palestinian Christian family in mandatory Palestine, which means by mandate, in Jerusalem's Musrara neighborhood, and became a Jordanian citizen after Jordan annexed the West Bank. Now, remember, the Oded Yinon plan said Jordan would basically take in all the Palestinians. That was Israel's plan. Anyway, it says, according to his mother, Mary, Sirhan was traumatized as a child by the violence he witnessed in the Arab-Israeli conflict, including the death of his older brother, who was run over by an Israeli military vehicle. As an adult, Sirhan changed church denominations several times, joining Baptist and Seventh-day Adventist churches. So Palestinian Christian, there are Palestinians who are Christians, not all Muslim. In 1966, he joined the esoteric organization Ancient Mystical Order of the Rose Cross, one of the Rosicrucian orders. And this was 66, a couple of years before RFK was assassinated. Goes on to say, and so I just thought, when I was reading this last week, I thought it's kind of a stretch to say that I get the MK Ultra thing, but to say that he's satanic. When I read this, you may know why I thought, oh, I totally could see him being satanic because of this. When Sirhan was 12 years old, his family emigrated to the U.S., moving briefly to New York and then to California. He attended Elliott Junior High, John Muir High, and Pasadena City College. I live in Pasadena. Those are all around here. I mean, I drive past them all the time. I think John Muir may have been where Eddie Van Halen went, David Lee Roth, those guys. Lots of people have gone to those schools. Maybe Jackie Robinson went to one of these schools, maybe Elliott. I can't remember. Pasadena City College, though, was where Jack Parsons, Sex and Rockets Jack Parsons, there's a huge building with Parsons on top of it, started what would later branch off to become JPL, the Jet Propulsion Lab, which is also right around here with NASA. I've driven past the Planetary Society, which is the Carl Sagan thing, which also has a connection with that. I drive past this huge Scientology thing. I don't know if it started here or what, but it was definitely big here. So all these things are coming together, and it says, this isn't relevant to that, but I'm just going to close this out. Shortly after the family moved to California, Sirhan's father, Bashara, returned alone to the Middle East. My grandmother was left in an orphanage here, and her father returned to Syria, but that was like 100 years ago. Standing 5'5" and weighing 120 pounds at age 20, Sirhan moved to Corona to train to be a jockey while working at a stable, but lost his job and abandoned the pursuit after suffering a head injury in a racing accident. Sirhan never became a U.S. citizen, instead retaining his Jordanian citizenship. So he had a head incident. It says he was born in 1944. So he would have, been 22 then. And so he had a head incident. He joined the Rosicrucians. He was in Pasadena going to PCC where all this stuff was going down, probably around then. Let's look real quick at when Jack Parsons, American rocket engineer, died in 1952. So I guess this stuff kind of predated it. I wonder when the JPL was established. That was founded in 1936 by Caltech researchers. Yeah, so that all this stuff is right near here. Anyway, I just thought it was interesting because I do now believe that he could have had those kind of satanic, maybe that's where they recruit him or that he had the, brain damage. Very, very interesting. Okay. So let us read on. Chapter 9. Let me get rid of my stuff that's in my way. Dr. Cameron's Chamber of Horrors. In an effort to escape problems having to do with jurisdiction, much CIA experimentation during the MK Ultra era was conducted in Canada and in other foreign countries. Early funding of Canadian experimentation went to James Tyhurst, who in 1951 had been part of a committee providing oversight on Projects Artichoke and Bluebird. The Canadian Defense Research Board also provided money to Tyhurst, who did research on the effects of LSD on over 300 patients at Hollywood Hospital in Vancouver. CIA-funded research into LSD was also done in Saskatchewan by Abram Hoffer and Humphrey Osmond. Another early CIA mind control program in Canada was experimental studies of attitude changes in individuals, with contract X38 given to Dr. Donald O. Hebb of McGill University in 1951. Sensory deprivation and isolation in interrogation was researched, with the first subjects volunteer university students. After prolonged isolation, many of the subjects reached a point where they could no longer distinguish waking from sleeping. One of the most macabre series of experiments outside of the Inquisition was funded by the CIA and conducted by Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron, with funds also coming from the Canadian government, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the Geschichter Foundation. Cameron had studied at the Royal Mental Hospital in Glasgow, Scotland, under the tutelage of eugenicist Sir David Henderson. He later took over the psychiatric division of the Allen Memorial Institute at McGill in Montreal, which had been founded with Rockefeller monies. CIA Director Alan Dulles called Allen Memorial a good source for human guinea pigs. That's a quote. During the 1950s, Cameron was anything but a rogue researcher. He was one of the most influential shrinks on the planet, founding the Canadian division of the World Federation of Mental Health with his friend, Tavistock's Brigadier General John Rawlings Rees. Cameron became president of many major psychiatric organizations, including the Canadian, American, and World Psychiatric Organizations. So the head of the psychiatric organizations are literally doing human experimentations on people's minds and getting them from universities. Like, it is really that's what happened to Ted Kaczynski, man. Cameron seemingly took the Freemasonic dictum ordo ab chaos, order out of chaos, to heart and set about turning patients, some of them suffering from ailments as insignificant as nervousness or mild depression, into zombies using a variety of grisly techniques. These included dosing patients with drugs, including thorazine, Nebutol, and Seconal, then giving them amphetamines to wake them up. It's a little speedball right there. People pay good money for that. Yikes. At that point, they would be blasted with electroshocks administered at voltages 40 times greater than what was considered to be safe by most practitioners of the time. Patients would then be returned to their beds, tied down, and given psychic driving for up to 30 days. The repetition of recorded command signals with wording culled from their own psychiatric profiles. Patients were also subjected to sensory deprivation for up to 65 days or put into comas for weeks of drugged sleep. Cameron asked whether the behavior patterns of adults could be erased by a physiological process that attacked neural patterns. Could adults be made theoretically patternless? Could they be returned to a state of neurological and psychological infancy for a short period, and then could new patterns of behavior be introduced? In other words, Cameron was working at doing something not so different from the Goals 2000 approach currently being used on American school children. And here's the thing, this isn't just like, well, we need to know answers. They're doing this for a purpose, and you can see it. I mean, speaking of what we're doing to children then, from uh, transgender surgery on minors to the school shooting traumas and everything, they are really exploiting their ability to manipulate the psyches of kids, in my opinion. Linda McDonald is one among many persons who remembers being treated by Dr. Cameron. Her experience was described by Dr. Colin Ross in a lecture given to the 9th Annual Western Clinical Conference on Trauma and Dissociation in April of 1996. Quote, she was 25 years old when she went to McGill to be treated for a relatively mild postpartum depression. She turned 26 during her hospitalization from March to early September 1963. During the course of her hospitalization, she received 102 ECT treatments, that's electroconvulsive therapy, using the Page-Russell technique, in which the button is pushed 6 times per treatment instead of just once. She also received about 80 days of barbiturate and neuroleptic induced sleep. During the course of her hospitalization, now I have not only her testimony, I also have the actual medical record with all of the nursing notes documenting this and Ewan Cameron's signature in the chart. So this is not rumor or patient disorientation. This is the actual record. And this is work that has been settled out of court by the CIA. She comes in a normal, somewhat depressed person. She gets regressed back to incontinent of urine, incontinent of feces, totally disoriented, unable to state her own name, year, where she is, recognize her children, recognize her husband. She gradually comes out of this. At the time of discharge, she is sent home to live with her husband and children, resume normal sexual relations with her husband. She doesn't know how to drive a car, read, cook, or use a toilet. Not only does she not know exactly what sex is all about, and she's not exactly sure who her husband is, she doesn't know what the concept of a husband is. She neuropsychologically pulls out of this over months, and several months down the road, she's at the point where a full-time homemaker has taught her how to scramble eggs. She was a fully competent housewife and mother before this. When her children go out to play on the street, she is unable to remember 30 seconds later where they are. So she puts a map of the neighborhood up on the wall and puts pins in the map to keep track of where her kids are playing. Otherwise, she goes into a panic and doesn't realize what's going on. So it looks like their experiment worked. They, even after she was finished with this stuff, she was still a tabula rasa, a blank slate. Mary is another person who remembers being violated by brainwashing procedures under the hand of Dr. Cameron. She was born in Halifax, Canada in 1947, a short time after her father left the army. Her childhood was spent in Ontario, Canada. She recalls being taken from her home on a number of occasions for mind control experimentation. These experiments, she believes, took place in Upper New York State and the Uplands Canadian Forces Base near Ottawa, Canada. She says that these procedures took place in a building called the Playhouse. Here, Mary says, in a room with walls but without a ceiling, she received an electronic mind control implant through her nostril that was fixed behind her eyeball. She also recalls being suspended in midair with the electric current flowing through her, causing her to make jerking, inadvertent body movements. It was horrible because my head was conscious, but they made my body do things and I couldn't stop it. It was like being a robot. Mary also remembers having electroshock, being subjected to sensory deprivation experiments, being drugged, and being abused sexually. She says that the experimentation ruined her life. A marriage at age 20 fell apart, and she has not been able to sustain a stable relationship since that time. In 1986, she suffered a complete nervous breakdown. In the 1990s, bits and pieces of memory involving hospitals and electroshock came to the surface and encouraged Mary to investigate what had happened to her in her childhood. She went to the local library and checked out a book about the MK Ultra experiments that included pictures of Ewan Cameron. When she saw a photo of Cameron, a flood of memories of her mind control ordeal burst forth. She became hysterical and thought she was going to die. In 1991, Maclean's magazine reported that the Mulroney government had appointed a commission composed of a single lawyer, a defeated conservative MP, George Cooper of Halifax, loyal to the regime that held the answer to his future, to investigate the claims of 9 victims of Dr. Cameron, 9 out of the hundreds that Cameron is known to have abused. Cooper recommended that each victim be given $100,000, but not, he said, due to any government wrongdoing, but as an expression of a collective sense of accountability for events that took place in good faith with ill effect. Cameron retired from his Chamber of Horrors in 1964 and died of a heart attack while mountain climbing in 1967. Eventually, the CIA also got around to cash settlements for a few of the people whose lives were destroyed by Cameron and his psychiatric henchmen. Dang. He has a couple of references in the notes. Operation Mind Control by Walter Bowart. Psychic Dictatorship in the USA by Alex Constantine. Gordon Thomas, Journey into Madness, the true story of secret CIA mind control and medical abuse. I probably have that one. Sounds like one of the ones I'd buy. All right, we ready for chapter 10? I think it's going to get worse because it's Dr. Delgado who electronic implants and Dr. Delgado. In 1870, 2 German researchers named Hitzig and Fritsch electrically stimulated the brains of dogs, demonstrating that certain portions of the brain were the centers of motor function. The American Dr. Robert Bartholow, within 4 years, demonstrated that the same was true for human beings. By the turn of the century in Germany, Fedor Krauss was able to do a systematic electrical mapping of the human brain using conscious patients undergoing brain surgery. Another early researcher into electrical stimulation of the brain was Walter Rudolf Hess, who began research into ESB in the 1930s, jolting patients' brains with shocks administered through tiny needles that pierced their skulls. During the decades of the 40s and 50s, Wilder Penfield, a neurosurgeon at McGill University, experimented with electrical brain stimulation on patients undergoing surgery. One of Penfield's discoveries was that the application of electricity on alert patients could stimulate the memory of past events. Since 1949, the Tulane University Department of Psychiatry and Neurology has done experimentation in the implantation of electrodes into patients' brains. According to one of their staff-generated reports, quote, by implantation of electrodes into various predetermined specific brain sites of patients capable of reporting thoughts and feelings, we have been able to make invaluable long-term observations. Other early researchers into direct brain stimulation were Robert Heath of Tulane School of Medicine in New Orleans and his associate, Dr. Russell Monroe. Dr. Monroe, isn't he the psychiatrist on The Simpsons? Beginning in 1950, with funding from the CIA and the military, among other sources, they implanted as many as 125 electrodes into subjects' brains and also experimented by injecting a wide variety of drugs directly into the brain tissue through small tubes. These drugs included LSD, psilocybin, and mescaline. One of Heath's memorable suggestions was that lobotomy should be used on subjects not as a therapeutic measure, but for the convenience of the staff. That's like Rosemary Kennedy. My mother always said there was nothing wrong with her except for she was promiscuous. So Joe got her lobotomized. And I think Rose never forgave him for it because he did it without consulting her, the mom. According to Heath, in the old days, we could leave the electrodes in for only a few days. We'd stay up all night making recordings. After we refined our method, we started leaving the electrodes in up to several years so that the patients could be re-stimulated when symptoms recurred. Eventually, of course, we developed a pacemaker with its own internal power source to provide the patient with continuous stimulation. Heath and Monroe demonstrated that by implanting electrodes into the brains of their subjects, they could switch on and off a variety of emotional and mental states, including fear, feelings of well being, sexual sensations, as well as controlling memory and artificially induced hallucinations. These feelings and thoughts, selectively chosen by those wielding the electric push button, could in Pavlovian fashion be used for reward and punishment. Frightening Me is saying this is Neuralink's predecessor. Yeah, sounds like it. One experiment performed. Yeah, and when was this happening? Beginning in 1950. So they are 75 years into this. And, it's hard to get it out of your brain. Musk is a created person, like this stuff, Neuralink, whatever. They're just CIA operations. It's not that him just popping onto the scene and starting to do this stuff. He's there to give it a face. That's all. One experiment performed by Heath utilized subject B19, a young male homosexual. Heath set about treating the man's homosexuality by inserting electrodes into his brain, including in the septum, a cerebral pleasure center. When Heath would activate the electrodes, the man would experience something akin to a slow burn orgasm. The man was shown heterosexual pornographic films while electricity was channeled through the electrodes in an effort to rearrange his pleasure orientations and switch his sexual interest from men to women. Eventually, the man was given his own control box, which during one 3-hour period, he pushed 1,500 times for self-stimulation. Isn't that like once a second almost? Like once every second and a third or something? A 20-year-old female prostitute was brought to Tulane, and the man's brainwaves were studied while he engaged in sex with her. By 1976, Heath had come up with the cerebellar pacemaker, designed to electrically stimulate the brain through an array of tiny electrodes inserted at the back of the head, under the skull on the cerebellum. Although early versions of the pacemaker included a battery pack that the patient would carry in his pocket or on his belt, later versions would be implanted in the patient's abdomen. Heath was far from the only person thinking about using implants for control. In 1956, Curtis Schaefer, working as an electrical engineer for Norden Kate, offered the following prescription at the National Electronics Conference in Chicago. Schaefer said the ultimate achievement of biocontrol may be man himself. The controlled subjects would never be permitted to think as individuals. A few months after birth, a surgeon would equip each child with a socket mounted under the scalp and electrodes reaching selected areas of brain tissue. The subject's sensory perceptions and muscular activity could be either modified or completely controlled by bioelectric signals radiating from state-controlled transmitters. Intelligence agencies have long been interested in the possibilities of direct brain electrical stimulation. A report on the CIA's MK-Ultra Subproject 94, issued in October 1960, said, initial biological work on techniques and brain locations essential to providing conditioning and control of animals has been completed. The feasibility of remote control of activities in several species of animals has been demonstrated. The present investigations were directed toward improvement of techniques. A CIA research staff memorandum for the deputy director of the agency from April 21st, 1961 stated, at present time, we feel that we are close to having debugged a prototype system whereby dogs can be guided along specific courses through land areas out of sight and at some distance of the operator. In addition to its possible practical value in operations, this phenomenon is a very useful research tool in the area of the behavioral sciences. Dr. Redacted is taking appropriate action to exploit our knowledge of this area and provide adequate background for the development of future agency applications in the general areas of influencing human behavior, indirect assessment, and interrogation aids. Here it is. The Spaniard Dr. Jose Manuel Rodriguez Delgado, who studied medicine and taught physiology in Madrid, casts a long shadow in early CIA mind control research. Delgado is the man who perfected the stimoceiver, a tiny electronic device that is implanted into the brains of humans and animals and is used to transmit electrical impulses directly to the brain. Delgado came to the United States in 1950 to work at Yale University, where he was to remain for more than 20 years. He was financed by a number of agencies, including the Office of Naval Intelligence, which was used to channel CIA funds. Unlike many of the researchers at the edge of behavioral control who seek anonymity, we are familiar with a good deal of Delgado's early research because he authored a book on the subject called Physical Control of the Mind Toward a Psycho-Civilized Society. He also wrote several less well-known monographs. In a 1967 medical report titled Man's Intervention in Intracerebral Functions, Delgado rhapsodized about how he had, quote, started to influence the physiological basis of the mind, and scientific investigation has established the principles that we can experiment with intracerebral mechanisms responsible for the onset, development, and maintenance of specific behavioral and mental functions. The greatest challenge, however, is the possibility that we might substitute, at least in part, human intelligence for natural choices in man's design of man's highest quality, mental function. In the same monograph, Delgado said that he had invented several types of brain implants. One type was the radio stimulator that provided jolts of electricity to the brain that were controlled by radio. Programmed stimulators were another type of brain implant, Delgado said. The advantage of the programmed stimulator is that it is self-contained, as does not depend on a radio link, and therefore the mobility of the subject is not limited, which is an important consideration and possible application of this unit for ambulatory therapy in humans. Another type of stimoceiver was the radio injector. The subjects of this type of stimoceiver are, according to Delgado, equipped with mutilated electrodes attached to fine tunings, forming assemblies called chemitrodes, which are permanently implanted in the brain. Administration of chemicals is performed with a specially designed chemitrode pump, which measures 40 by 18 millimeters and weighs only 10 grams, and consists of two lucite compartments separated by an elastic membrane. One side is filled with synthetic spinal fluid or any other solution to be injected, and the adjoining side is filled with a solution of hydrozone. Hydrozone? When a current is passed through the latter compartment, gas is released and its pressure pushes the drug to be injected through the chemitrode. It sounds like an IUD. IUDs have hormones in them and they supposedly just leak out into your body for 5 years. Like that is hormones are the most, I think, if I'm not mistaken, hormones are the most powerful, biologic substance, gram for gram. So you don't need much. I mean, if they put 5 years supply in one little thing. In an interview, Delgado said that the brain is like an ocean through which, by relying on instrument guidance, we can navigate without visibility and reach a specific destination. What Delgado is specifically talking about when he says instrument guidance is locking the subject's head into a metal restraint attached to a metal arm that holds either a long hypodermic needle for chemical stimulation or a thin steel wire electrode that can be hooked up to dozens of other wires. Controls allow the vertical and lateral adjustment of the head until the needle or electrode is specifically targeted to a hole that has previously been drilled in the skull. Yikes. The electrode is then thrust into the brain. What's wrong with this guy? Delgado soon came up with a new transdermal stimoceiver that communicates back the reactions of the subject to the electrical or chemical stimuli. Delgado reported, the new system described here is based on the implantation under the skin of a small instrument, without batteries, which is powered by transdermal reception of energy and is able to stimulate 3 different areas of the brain with remote control. Is the brain the battery here? Is that what I'm hearing? Dr. Colin Ross describes another experiment performed by Delgado. Quote, he describes a technical innovation in an 11-year-old boy who had brain electrodes implanted for non-therapeutic reasons. Previously, you had to have wires connecting the transmitter box directly to the electrode terminals that were sticking through the skull. In this 11-year-old boy, however, Jose Delgado had figured out how to have a remote transmitter without a direct wire connection. He describes pushing a button in this otherwise normal 11-year-old boy's brain transmitter box, and the boy starts being confused about his identity, wondering whether he is a girl, and talking about wanting to marry Jose Delgado. He pushes another button, and the behavior stops. So they literally identified the button that will make a child confused about his sexual identity. Boy, good thing they didn't use that to ill effect. These innovations in brain implants were, in fact, a very primitive level of Delgado's research that would later be exceeded by light years. Later breakthroughs in technology were documented in a paper published in 1975, two-way transdermal communication with the brain. By this time, Delgado had linked his brain implants with computers. So I'll read more from that. But at a certain point, and I don't know if they get into this in this book or if I've read it elsewhere, but they can just tune into your wavelengths. They don't actually have to have an implant. So if they know exactly where they want to press that button and they know, the wavelength to tune into, I mean, they could do that to kids all over the place. The most interesting aspect of the transdermal stimulosievers is the ability to perform simultaneous recording and stimulation of brain functions, thereby permitting the establishment of feedbacks and on-demand programs of excitation with the aid of the computer. With the increasing sophistication and miniaturization of electronics, it may be possible to compress the necessary circuitry for a small computer into a chip that is implantable subcutaneously. Okay, this is obviously Neuralink. Lisa Simpson says in the comments, the frogs are turning gay. I think that's the Prozac, isn't it? Something like that. When Brandon had an aneurysm, they installed this system. Lisa says, all I can say is I'm glad I can trust the government and the health industry. Woo! In this way, a new self-contained instrument could be devised. Sorry. In this way, a new self-contained instrument could be devised capable of receiving, analyzing, and sending back information to the brain, establishing artificial links between unrelated cerebral areas, functional feedbacks, and programs of stimulation contingent on the appearance of predetermined patterns. The monograph further stated that two-way transdermal exploration of the brain has the following possibilities. 1, long-term depth EEG, that's electroencephalogram, recording to monitor physiological, pharmacological, and psychological phenomena in unrestrained subjects. So they're not there in the chair, they're out in the world. 2, long-term electrical stimulation of the brain to influence autonomic, somatic, and behavior responses, or to provide information directly to the brain, circumventing normal sensory receptors. 3, communication from the brain to computer and back to the brain for the establishment of artificial intracerebral links and feedback circuits. 4, clinical applications to humans of on-demand programs of stimulation triggered by predetermined electrical pattern. Many popular articles on Delgado intend us to think that his primary purpose was the rehabilitation of the mentally and physically sick. This does not happen to be the case. Delgado was a blatant control freak. An example is Delgado's experimentation on changing the social orientation of animals. One staging area for this experimentation was an island in the Bermudas where Delgado maintained a free roving population of gibbons. Those are, I guess, little monkeys with electronic implants using electrical brain boosts to build and destroy social orders among those primates as if he was knocking down a row of dominoes. Delgado returned to his native Spain in the 1970s, where he was ostensibly employed as a physiology professor at the University of Madrid. He continued his experimentation on human subjects while in Spain, although these researches have not been publicized. According to the report of a doctor who was a friend of Delgado's, one of the experiments that Delgado engaged in was the stimulation of the brains of the elderly in order to cause them to experience continuous sexual orgasms. The sexualizing of the elderly was a stated goal of one of these things, I remember. There was some foreshadowing in one of these books about that, and they do it. Viagra. By the No judgment on anyone. It's just, using it for that reason or for some other reason, whatever, if that's people don't use it because they don't like it. They use it because they like it. But sexualizing old people is definitely part of the plan. I'm not exactly sure why. By the 1980s, Delgado had changed directions in his work. Working at the 100 room, Ramon E. I should at least know how to pronounce Spanish with a name like Monica Perez. The J is an H, right? Julio, yeah. Cajal, Ramon y Cajal Hospital in Madrid. Delgado now began to emphasize changing brainwave patterns and physiology through electromagnetic broadcasting. Delgado said much more research will have to be done. But with further knowledge, I am hopeful that without surgery or drugs, we will eventually be able to correct abnormal brain activity in humans. Yada, yada. In an interview, Delgado stated that electromagnetic broadcasting for mind control had been developed to a state of effectiveness and could be utilized at up to 3 kilometers. 3 kilometers! Interestingly enough, part of the thrust of Delgado's research was genetics. Since he had determined that low-intensity electromagnetic fields were capable of altering DNA. Man, it's not boring. I don't know how I would yawn. They're altering DNA. Delgado said, our understanding of genetics is very clumsy at present. But if we can produce lethal mutations with EMF fields, perhaps we will someday be able to use the technique to produce behavior changes. Whoa. Summing up his philosophy, Delgado remarked, this new knowledge is so important that I think it should radically change the philosophy of our educational system. Yeah, frightening me, says 5G, and that's what I was thinking. As I was reading that, I was like, gosh, you don't want to be too near, Walter Reed Hospital. But of course, it's the 5G everywhere. And the Trump administration made it, localities weren't allowed to say no. He also says atrazine in the water is what turned the frogs gay. Let's see. Summing up his philosophy, Delgado remarked, this new knowledge is so important that I think it should radically change the philosophy of our educational system, which believes in the sanctity of individuals, thinking that an individual exists at birth. This belief is not true. Wow. We're right. The conspiracy theorists are right. And this science is going to prove the fallacy of democracy in the sense that we talk about the rights of the individual. This democratic belief is not true. Because we are forming this individual, because we are constructing his brain, we are willy-nilly making the differences we either desire or dislike. Always a visionary in the Orwell. But that ignores the reality, and I think chaos theory proves it, of free will. You have certain abilities, you have senses, you take in the information, you make choices, and you evaluate the consequences and you take action. I mean, And that's how you mature. That's how you grow into the person you are. And yeah, you can jam an ice pick up somebody's brain and make them different, but that doesn't mean that they weren't who they were. Always a visionary in the Orwellian mode, Delgado said, looking into the future, it may be predicted that telerecording and telestimulation of the brain will be widely used. So no electrodes needed. Another researcher who specialized in brain implants, I mean, he's right? Is Stuart McKay, Dr. Stuart McKay, who in 1968 penned a textbook titled Biomedical Telemetry. McKay reported among the many telemetry instruments being used today are miniature radio transmitters that can be swallowed, carried externally, or surgically implanted in man or animal. Didn't McVeigh say that that was something that happened to him? And I think it was the Navy Yard shooter had something like that. They permit the simultaneous study of behavior and physiological functioning. The scope of observations is too broad to more than hint at a few examples. The possibilities are limited only by the imagination of the investigator. In the early 1970s, in the Law Review, Crime and Justice, an article by Barton Ingram and Gerald Smith was published titled The Use of Electronics in the Observation and Control of Human Behavior and Its Possible Use in Rehabilitation and Control. The article stated, this is 50 years ago, in the very near future, a computer technology will make possible alternatives to imprisonment. The development of systems for telemetering information from sensors implanted in or on the body will soon make possible the observation and control of human behavior without actual physical contact. Through such telemetric devices, it will be possible to maintain 24-hour-a-day surveillance over the subject and to intervene electronically or physically to influence and control selected behavior. It will thus be possible to exercise control over human behavior and from a distance without physical contact. The possible implications for criminology and corrections of such telemetric systems is tremendously significant. During the Vietnam War, one of those interventions to influence behavior was done by a team of CIA psychologists at the Bien Hoa prison outside of Saigon, where they were working as part of the infamous Phoenix program. Suspected members of the National Liberation Front were brought into the prison, and experiments were done on them. One such experiment involved anesthetizing 3 prisoners and then implanting electrodes in their brains. After the prisoners were brought back to consciousness, they were placed in a room where knives had been left in the open. They were covertly observed by the psychiatrists as the electrodes were turned on, sending jolts of electricity directly to their brains. The apparent hope was that the prisoners would go berserk and attack each other with the knives, providing a juicy footnote to the CIA psychiatrists' reports. To the dismay of the CIA shrinks, this did not happen. The electrode implanted prisoners were deemed useless. They were summarily shot and their bodies burned. And we're the good guys, though, by the way. In the States, doctors at the University of Mississippi in Jackson, as of 1972, were implanting electrodes into the brains of Black children as young as 5 years old, with the purpose of controlling hyperactive and aggressive behavior. A report from Peter R. Bregan, states that their brains were being implanted with electrodes that were heated up to melt areas of the brain that regulate emotion and intellect. Although it has been a closely guarded secret, the technology of electronic brain control implants has continued to be advanced throughout this century and continues to be applied by mind control practitioners today. Okay, he was talking in 1999. It has been 25 years and one Elon Musk since then. One area where the technology continues to be developed is the University of Michigan Center for Neural Communication Technology. According to information on their website, The center was initiated to obtain resources necessary to meet the increasing demands for multi-channel silicon substrate microprobes fabricated at the University of Michigan Center for Integrated Sensors and Circuits. These probes are being developed for acute and chronic recording and/or stimulation of the central nervous system. I want to keep reading. Are you guys down? We got finished kind of early, and I have a few extra chapters to do because I'm going on vacation. Let's do it. Do I have time to go get an espresso? Give me like 1 minute. I'm not gonna change this though. I'm gonna say. All right, that's me. Here you go. Be right back. Was it 2 minutes? It was 2 minutes. That was pretty good. It takes 2 minutes to turn on the machine and make the espresso, but not to drink it. I still have to drink it. Yes, yes, yes. So Frightening Me is saying the Navy Yard shooter had ELF written on his rifle. Extremely low frequency. Yes, I was going to correct myself. I did not think he had an implant. I think they were beaming stuff right into his brain because he would hear voices. Man, oh man, oh man. These people are sickos, right? Okay, so that was 2 chapters. And so I guess this is going to be part 5 and part 6. Yum. Love espresso. The UT game is on. So my husband and his brother are watching it. I expect screaming. I don't know if you heard this. And they're making insanely spicy sausages, which I had a bite of. So now my mouth is I'm a Yankee. I married a Texan of Mexican heritage, basically, Puerto Rican and what have you. The Puerto Ricans don't eat the spicy food. It's the Mexicans. But man, it will make your eyes water. I brought espresso to the relationship. All right, let's hit it. Oh, I forgot my water. Let me go get my water. Okay. In Italy, they just shoot the espresso. You don't even sit down. You just belly up to the bar and shoot it. It's the best caffeine too. It's like super pure. It's like first press caffeine. Cheers. All right, let's hit it. So we're on chapter 11. Turn on, tune in, become a robot. Along with CIA mind control programs, media manipulation, and Kinsey's sexual revolution in the 50s and 60s in America was ripe for another ambitious operation: the restructuring of American society through the use of psychedelic drugs and mysticism. Enter yoga, perhaps? As illogical as it may seem at first glance, the LSD drugging of the world and an accompanying injection of mystical religion fits neatly into the New World Order and eugenics, their intention for population control and a post technological world. So we are going to push through the technocracy into deindustrialization, but it'll probably be one of those Star Trekian things where we're all primitive, but they have like an AI system controlling everything, whether they are still in control of it or not. Dang. Believing that the world is overpopulated and that resources are being squandered through consumption by the masses. I think what the overlords have planned for energy consumption by way of AI blows all that crap out of the water. That should cause the revolution. I mean, what those ah anyway. Dystopian social visionaries epitomized by those of Tavistock and the Club of Rome have repeatedly urged that the solution is a return to a mystical primitivism, at least for the vast majority of the world's population. And that primitivism, they seem to believe, can be furthered through the use of drugs and mysticism. Is it like music? Is it like the Benedict option? Strangely, LSD may be a byproduct of German occultism. According to Captain Alfred Hubbard, the intelligence agency Johnny Appleseed of LSD, the drug was discovered years prior to its announced discovery by Albert Hofmann in a project mounted by members of the Rudolf Steiner Anthroposophy, an offshoot of Blavatsky's occultist theosophy group, to discover a peace pill. The documented history of LSD begins much later. I noticed that the Rudolf Steiner stuff was making kind of a comeback. I remember people who liked it when I was a little bit younger, other moms, or even before I was a mom. And I never thought it was bad, but an offshoot of theosophy, I don't know, man. The major proponent of the acid drugging of America was Aldous Huxley, the grandson of British imperialist Thomas Huxley, one of the founders of the Rhodes Roundtable. And who was the Huxley? Didn't he have a brother who was also into this stuff? I think so. The guy who does the rituals, cult rituals. The materialist Thomas Huxley was referred to during his life as Darwin's bulldog for his efforts at suppressing opposition to Darwinism and his frank advocacy of genocide for the Australian Aborigine for eugenics purposes. Aldous Huxley was a lifelong collaborator with Arnold Toynbee, who was on the council of the Round Table's Royal Institute of International Affairs and was the head of British intelligence's research division. Oh, and Toynbee was one of the ones, Tragedy and Hope talks about him. Carol Quigley refers to his particularly, who said he saw like patterns of civilization. Oswald Spengler said the same thing, but his observation of the patterns were different. I think Christopher Dawson also has some of that pattern of civilization. Christopher Dawson said it rises and falls with religion. Spengler, I think, was the one who said basically it's all math. It's math. So if you see eclectic architecture, the civilization is in decline. Dawson said if you see eclectic religions, more than one religion, in decline. That in both of those cases, those fundamentals are working not in harmony and therefore will not progress. Even if you're getting richer, it's the civilization is in decline. Toynbee had one of those theories of civilization. I don't know his in a nutshell, but Tragedy and Hope, Carol Quigley, who loves the Anglo-American establishment, the secret societies, their plans, I think was an acolyte of Toynbee. But I didn't realize that Toynbee was in the Royal Institute of International Affairs. That's Royal Institute of National is the CFR and Chatham House stuff, I think. Was the head of British Intelligence's was the head of British Intelligence's research division. So I don't take his theories of civilization at face value. In a 1971 dialogue with Kei Wakizumi of Kyoto Sangyo University, Toynbee said, "If I am right in forecasting that a world dictatorship is likely to be the way in which we shall avoid liquidating ourselves in an atomic war," jumping right on that nuclear terror, "and if I live to see this development, I should on the whole be optimistic, because I should not expect the dictatorship to be permanent. It is most unlikely, I fear, that it will be established by the will or even with the acquiescence of the majority of mankind. It seems to be likely to be imposed on the majority by a ruthless, efficient, and fanatical minority, inspired by some ideology or religion. I guess that mankind will acquiesce in a harsh, Leninian kind of dictatorship as a lesser evil than self extermination, or that a continuing anarchy which could end only in self extermination. If the reluctant majority does accept this dictatorship on this ground, I think they will be making the right choice. So swap out atomic terror with climate change, and it all goes together. As mankind will acquiesce in a harsh Leninian kind of dictatorship as a lesser evil than self extermination. What do you think Greta wants? Huxley was tutored by Fabian socialist and pivotal New World Order theorist H.G. Wells, author of The Open Conspiracy and other books detailing the intentions of the International New World Order faction, just like Carol Quigley did. They want us to know. I think they're bragging. Some people say it's like some mystical obligation that they have to reveal the method. Could be both. Wells was the head of British intelligence during World War I, who proposed the creation of a one-world brain, soberingly similar in concept to that of today's internet, that would ultimately act as a police of the mind. Well, I think we ain't seen nothing yet. Julian Huxley, yes, started UNESCO. Right. Thanks, Fright. Okay. It has been reported that Huxley was a member of, quote, the Children of the Sun, a mystical free love cult of children of the Round Table in Britain that may have shared more than just its name with the German Sonnenkinder, the term used to designate the eugenically bred, racially pure Lebensborn children of Nazi Germany. There is more to suggest this connection than just the name of the group. Members of the British Children of the Sun are reported to have included the fascist Sir Oswald Mosley, British intelligence agent George Orwell, and Guy Burgess. Burgess was one of the founders of the homosexual Freemasonry and higher sodomy of the Apostles at Cambridge, a founder of the pro-Nazi Anglo-German Fellowship in England. You might think that the Nazis putting everybody in concentration camps would put gays in the concentration camps, but it's the opposite. Well, maybe they did that too. They probably did that also, but they themselves were, I think, disproportionately homosexual. a paid agent of the Rothschilds family private intelligence network, and his most famous role, a Soviet spy. Other members of the Apostles' homosexual cabal included Soviet spies Blunt, Philby, and McLean, who were largely responsible for the massive compromise of Western intelligence to the Soviets that began in the 1930s. Huxley was a collaborator with Tavistock's Major John Rawlings Rees. Boy, these names are familiar. And author of the influential Brave New World. Among other eugenics ideas in the book is the strict structuralization of society through test tube breeding, with the lowest members of society denied oxygen during their fetal growth to reduce intelligence. That sounds like a certain injury that people get when as a result of some injections applied as small children. What the heck? In Brave New World Revisited, the book's non-fictional sequel, he wrote, "The 21st century will be the era of the world controllers. The older dictators fell because they could never supply their subjects with enough bread, enough circuses, enough miracles and mysteries." Mysteries. Under a scientific dictatorship, education will really work, with the result that most men and women will grow up to love their servitude and will never dream of revolution. There seems to be no good reason why a thoroughly scientific dictatorship should ever be overthrown. This is interesting. He's saying they have to supply their subjects with enough bread and circuses and miracles and mysteries. I can see all of that. I can see that, but the mysteries, I hadn't thought about mysteries being an essential need of a population. And that makes me wonder if the conspiracy stuff, which we are obviously allowed to scratch the surface of or see or be revealed, but it's not just that. It's tricky because, like, obviously they controlled the weather to some extent in Operation Popeye. They seeded the clouds, right? And it washed away the Viet Cong in some places. And you see the chemtrails, whatever that comes out of those planes, creates clouds, changes your weather. Absolutely does. But these hurricanes, which look like they're intentional, Stella and other people I have seen make a very hard to deny argument that that kind of a system is just too enormous to be able to control really at all. Yet it's it's so easy to it's promoted to have these suspicions. It's promoted maybe because they just want us to have mysteries, want us to spend our time down in rabbit holes. Man, it's too much. It's too much. Huxley came to America from Britain shortly after the first published findings about LSD in 1949. He was accompanied by his friend Dr. Humphrey Osmond, who, once in America, immediately set about toiling in the MK Ultra minefields, including turning on his friend to acid. While Huxley was the seed crystallizing dozens of LSD and mystico-religious projects, both official and informal. Huxley was also friends with George Estabrooks, who had done early work into the creation of mind control assassins and hypnotically installed multiple personalities, and worked with Andrija Puharich, an early researcher into the effects of electromagnetics on humans. Certainly, Huxley cannot have been unaware of the effects that the widespread distribution of LSD might bring about. He wrote, "Now let us consider another kind of drug, still undiscovered, but probably just around the corner. A drug capable of making people happy in situations where they would normally feel miserable. Such a drug would be a blessing, but a blessing fraught with grave political dangers. By making a harmless chemical euphoric freely available, a dictator could reconcile an entire population to a state of affairs to which self respecting human beings ought not to be reconciled. Prozac, that's what Ted said. The more we get away from being able to function naturally, the more we need augmentation of the mind to accept it. Huxley, who was also a pal of CIA mind control kingpin Louis Jolyon West, was responsible for turning on dozens of persons who went on to proselytize the mystical religion and acid, including Alan Watts, Ken Kesey, members of the Grateful Dead musical group. Do not tell my husband, he will not hear it. And anthropologist Gregory Bateson, who had been a psychological planner for the OSS. From the ranks of persons turned on directly or indirectly by Aldous Huxley, an entire generation was mentally regrooved. Supporting the idea that Huxley may have had an agenda other than enlightening America to the Buddha mind, an FBI memorandum from 1968 states that Grateful Dead bandleader Jerry Garcia was used to channel youth dissent and rebellion into more benign and non-threatening directions. It is not known whether Garcia was a witting collaborator in this channeling. I think that's true on its face. They told them to drop out, and even the draft got the most dedicated objectors, resistors out of the country entirely. So take all the young people, send them to the war, send anybody who objects to that to Canada, and then anybody who's left behind, just zip them out, man. Zip them out and mellow them out so they're not, or make them think that participating in the process is for squares. I mean, there's so much to it. There's so much to it. And then get them to stay home and code free, which is what Stuart Brand said was the most significant lasting contribution of the 60s. Huxley's most influential acolyte was Dr. Timothy Leary, who in the 1950s coasted on 8 monetary grants from the National Institute of Mental Health, a pipeline for CIA funding. Leary was first turned on to LSD by his longtime friend, CIA agent Frank Barron. In an interview for High Times magazine in February 1978, Leary said, "If you look back, many things that we thought were accidents turned out were not accidents. The entire LSD movement itself was sponsored originally by the CIA, to whom I give great credit. I would not be here today if it had not been for the foresight and prestige of the CIA psychologists. So give the CIA credit for being truly an intelligence agency." Mind control researcher Walter Boart interviewed Leary in the 70s, and the acid guru had some interesting things to say about his association with the CIA. Asked, "Do you think CIA people were involved in your group in the 60s?" Leary responded, "Of course they were. I would say that 80% of my movements, 80% of the decisions I made were suggested to me by CIA people. I like the CIA. The game they're playing is better than the FBI, better than the Saigon police, better than Franco's police, better than the Israeli police. They're 1,000 times better than the KGB. So it comes down to, who are you going to work for, the Yankees or the Dodgers?" Boart might have responded, "Which Dodgers?" is really the question. Boart might have responded that one could simply drop out from the game, as Leary had counseled an entire generation. Leary sang the praises of the CIA throughout the interview. Asked whether he had been used by the CIA, Leary said, "I've known this for 10 years. Maybe longer." I think if you read Mary's Mosaic about Mary Myers, Cord Meyer's ex-wife, who was JFK's last mistress, who was killed the day the Warren Commission report came out, and her son wrote this book. I believe she was a liaison, more or less, between JFK and Timothy Leary, turned him on to acid, and basically convinced him that world peace was possible. She may even have convinced him world government was desirable, but in any case, her husband, Cord Meyer, ex-husband, who spearheaded Operation Mockingbird, prior to that, had aspired to be the president of the world government. So I found that all interesting, but I believe that she was the one who got JFK to trip, and I think he did. I mean, that's what it says in the book anyway. In an attempt to pin him down, and she was the CIA wife, so, like, who knows what her role was. However, she was rubbed out, and, the mystery of her murder was never solved. Her house was basically gone through by, it may have been Angleton himself there, or one of his close associates, to see if there was anything there. Her diary, I think, disappeared. Just because these people are in on it doesn't mean they don't get outed and offed. So Bauer asks, in order to pin him down, "You were wittingly used by the CIA?" Leary hedged. "Wait, when you say CIA, it's like saying Ners, and the N-worders. I can't, get taken down. I knew I was being used by the intelligence agents of this country." Asked again whether he wittingly worked for the CIA, Leary answered forcefully, "Yes, I was a witting agent of the CIA, but I am not a willing agent of Nixon. I did everything in my power to throw out Nixon." Bowert asked him, "So you work for the Central Intelligence Agency? Is it the deputy director of plans you work for? Who makes out your checks?" "It's none of your business to know how those things work," was Leary's response. "I'll answer you no questions that have to do with business. I'll answer you any questions about history or people." "Okay, who makes out your check?" After the interview, Bowert, as well as several friends of Leary who were present, agreed that this was not the same man we'd known before he'd gone to prison. "We couldn't tell if he'd changed because of the normal prison brutality or because he was under some great pressures or had been tortured," Bowert says. "The first thought I had when seeing the altered Leary was, he's been the victim of one of the secret prison mind control programs." There is additional confirmation that Leary himself was the guinea pig of his esteemed intelligence agents. Bowert relates that while Leary was in Folsom Prison, he was held incommunicado for a period of time, and that according to his wife, Joanna Harcourt Smith Leary, when he was finally allowed to visit her, he seemed radically different. His head had been shaved, and he was bruised and pale. This information was confirmed by a former convict who told Bowert that during the period when Leary could not be located by his wife, the acid guru was given fright drugs. Anectine is one drug that induces hysterical fear. That's awful. And he was kept in solitary confinement in order to break him down. Wow. Leary returned to their cell with his head shaved and blue lines painted on it. According to the man, well, one day he comes back to the cell with lines on his head. They were actually very precise measurement lines. His head was shaved and it was marked with all these careful, precise blue lines. I asked him what the lines were for. He told me that they were going to give him a lobotomy. They were going to stick ice picks into his brain. He told me that it was really going to be great. They had him completely brainwashed. He said, "This is going to be the greatest thing. All my life, I've been going through this. You get up, you get down. But now," he said, "I'll be just as smart as I am, but I won't have to feel emotions anymore." Wow. Leary's initial intelligence handler may have been British agent Michael Hollingshead, yet another friend of Aldous Huxley. Hollingshead first provided Leary with acid, and according to reports of the period, Leary idolized him. One of Leary's major supporters was William Mellon Hitchcock, heir to Gulf Oil. Gulf Oil, interesting. Nephew to financier Andrew Mellon, and alleged to be a broker for money interests that included the mafia and the CIA. Mellon family foundations have long been used as a conduit for CIA monies, and several members of the family have been members of American intelligence agencies. Hitchcock's father was a university roommate with David Bruce, a chief of technological intelligence of the OSS. During his tenure at the agency, CIA Director Richard Helms, the man who conceived of MK Ultra, was a close friend of the Mellons, as was Averell Harriman. Hitchcock was the largest investor in Resorts International. That's got connections with Trump. A consortium where a number of clandestine interests met, including British intelligence and the networks of mafia kingpins, Tibor Rosenbaum and Meyer Lansky. Some researchers have convincingly fingered Resorts International as part of the cabal that sponsored the killing of John F. Kennedy. Others involved in the acid drugging of the world included Captain Alfred M. Hubbard of the OSS, the Treasury Department, the Federal Narcotics Bureau, and the Food and Drug Administration. And, it is alleged, the mafia, who acted as a Johnny Appleseed of LSD. Hubbard, who first took LSD in 1951. Wait, I thought somebody else was the Johnny Appleseed of LSD. I don't know, man. I don't know if I'm gonna let that slide. Okay. Hubbard, who first took LSD in 1951 and guided Aldous Huxley through his second mescaline trip, distributed huge amounts of agency acid around the world. While he was passing out LSD, Hubbard also led raids on the LSD labs of rebel chemists, suggesting that Hubbard might have been an elitist who thought that acid was only good enough for the commissar class. So it was for the good guys. Interesting. In 1968, at the height of the hippie phase, Hubbard joined the world's largest military research think tank, Stanford Research Institute, as an investigator. Siri strikes again. This was done at the behest of Tavistock associate Willis Harman, at that time the director of the SRI Center for the Study of Social Policy, and reported to have himself been an experimenter with LSD. SRI was founded in 1946, reportedly by agents of the Tavistock Institute, and its first contracts were obtained from the defense establishment. SRI had already received Army money for research into chemical incapacitants, as well as for the alleged 1958 Project Shaky, delving into using the environment as a weapon through weather wars and controlled earthquakes. SRI is linked in its database with 2,500. Hold on. 1958 Project Shaky, delving into using the environment as a weapon through weather wars and controlled earthquakes. I actually am more open to believing that earthquakes can be caused, and therefore tsunamis, than that hurricanes can be controlled. And did I tell you I met a head of seismology out here, some bigwig at a university, and I'm so mad at myself for later for not asking him just casually. You can throw this stuff and just they don't even have to answer you. They can just go, give you a horrible look of, hey, so could they create an earthquake on purpose? You just throw that out there. And they kind of don't like you anymore, but at least you got that look. Sometimes I've done that on the screen before with the Fed here. Somebody I've suspected as being an agent of the federal government. All right. SRI is linked in its database with 2,500 other organizations, including the CIA, Bell Telephone, U.S. Army Intelligence, the Office of Naval Intelligence, RAND, Harvard, and MIT. Harman wrote to Hubbard saying, "Our investigations of some of the current social movements affecting education indicate that the drug usage prevalent among student members of the New Left is not entirely undesigned. Some of it appears to be present as a deliberate weapon aimed at political change. We are concerned with assessing the significance of this as it impacts on matters of long-range educational policy. In this connection, it would be advantageous to have you considered in the capacity of a special investigative agent who might have access to relevant data which is not ordinarily available." I'm just trying to draw a connection between they're experimenting on the New Left here, and I think they did that also with the jab, and it just makes you wonder, I mean, my conclusion is they really do not care about your political ideology at all. Frightening says, "This guy was writing about Jolly West in the '90s. I only heard about him from the book Chaos." Yeah, I read that book. Uh, Ardian says, "Look into Mary Pinchot Meyer's dad, Amos Pinchot." Oh, I never did that. I gotta write that down. Interesting, interesting. Okay, the USS Nietzsche supposedly causes earthquakes and was in Turkey during the recent Syrian earthquake. Yes, yes, yes. Monica, any thoughts on Jacques Vallée? He worked for SRI and was portrayed as the French UFO guy in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I never looked into him. I mean, I've definitely heard the name, but I never looked into him. All right. Uh, let's finish this chapter and I might go for another one. Well, who would have been promoting drug usage among student members of the New Left? Surely Harman didn't think it was the communists. This sounds more to me like a Kant language, C-A-N-T, Kant language proposal for carrying out political change. Kant language, does that mean occult? Does that mean a like a secret language or a disguised language? Hubbard was employed. Do you want to look it up? What does Kant mean? Kant language, C-A-N-T. Hubbard was employed by SRI ostensibly as a security guard. In fact, his actual work took place under the auspices of their Alternative Futures program. He was a security guard? A corporate strategy program that reminds one that Hubbard has his own corporate strategy of turning business and political leaders on to LSD. Political leaders, yeah, JFK, right. The LSD drugging of America was not limited to experimentation performed on adults. In the proceedings of the 19th Annual Convention and Scientific Program of the Society of Biological Psychiatry that took place in Los Angeles, May 13th, 1964, it is reported in the children's unit of Creedmoor State Hospital, with a resident population of 450 patients, ages 4 to 15, we have investigated the responses of some of these children to lysergic acid and related drugs in the psychiatric, psychological, and biochemical areas. This reminds me of the Liam Sheff expose. He was a New York Times reporter and a lefty. And he was trying to expose the orphanages in Harlem, experimenting with AIDS and maybe AZT on kids. And boy, it was flayed. And the New York Times said they wanted his article and they just took the opportunity to discredit him. And he was credible. He was right. Two groups of boys receiving daily LSD, UML, which is a methylated derivative of LSD, or psilocybin. At first, the medication was given weekly, but was eventually given daily for periods of up to several months. Dosages remained constant throughout. LSD at 150 micrograms, psilocybin at 20 milligrams daily, or UML at 12 milligrams daily, all given in 2 divided doses. The average duration of treatment was 2 to 3 months. I don't know about any of you, but I know what, like, pill bottles will tell you, but pieces of paper or mushrooms, like, don't come with the milligrams or micrograms, so I have absolutely no idea if this is a lot or a little. Kant language is a term for jargon or the language of a group. Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And there's another comment that there is a PDF, Amos Pinchot, Pinchot, Rebel Prince. So if you want to look that up, Amos Pinchot, Rebel Prince. All right, it is not necessary to comment at length on the magnitude of the LSD drugging program and its mystical retooling of the American psyche in the 60s. The varied results of that operation, the destruction of much of political activism in America, the birth of the quiche-breathed, lockstepping yuppies, the alienated and politically impotent punks and Gen X, and the drug gang fetishism of both black and white gangsta culture are testimony to the effectiveness of this far-reaching pacification program. Excellent observation, Jim. Excellent. Interesting. All right, let's keep going. Hold on. Air Force Major. Oh, this is chapter 12. Jolly West and the Violence Center. Air Force Major Louis Jolly West signed up early on as a co-conspirator in the CIA's MK Ultra, although most of his activities in the program are shadowed. I don't know what that means. In the most famous event of his career, while he was chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Oklahoma, West injected an elephant named Tusco with a huge dosage of LSD in an experiment supposedly designed to provide insight about animal behavior. That's terrible. Not surprisingly, Tusco collapsed into a stupor, and while trying to bring the elephant back to consciousness with a variety of drugs, West succeeded in killing the animal. That's terrible. And you know who else did something terrible to elephants? Is Thomas Edison. I believe he electrocuted an elephant, and they're super smart. Man, I like to eat animals, and I wouldn't object even to killing an elephant to eat it, but torturing them, you're not allowed to do that. Not allowed. I was taught my father didn't give two craps about animals, didn't have pets or anything, but he was a butcher, a meat cutter. He said he didn't ever slaughter the animals. Butchers kill them. He just cut them up. So he got it, but he was absolutely adamant that it was against God's law to torture or abuse an animal. Animal cruelty was absolutely a punishable sin. Not that this guy hasn't committed plenty of punishable sins. West lived in Haight-Ashbury in the summer of 1967. Yes, and that's the thing about that book, Chaos. I wonder if it pulled some punches. Let's see if Jim Keith gives us more here. He was supposedly involved in a project of studying the hippie in his native habitat. This was at the time that CIA chemists were allegedly collaborating and setting up laboratories for the production of LSD in the Bay Area, and one can only speculate just what West was up to. By the way, I saw a good 2-season show. I liked it with David Duchovny called Aquarius, and it was about Charles Manson and stuff. It was good. It was a good show. It got canceled, so it's not going to go anywhere. But if you got nothing to do, it's worth blowing through those episodes. West was in charge of the Department of Psychiatry at UCLA and director there of the Neuropsychiatric Institute until his death in 1999. In 1973, during Ronald Reagan's governorship in California, West proposed the creation of what he dubbed a Center for the Study and Reduction of Violence that would have been located in an abandoned Nike missile base in California. In a letter to Dr. J.M. Stubblebine, the director of health in the California Office of Health Planning, West said, comparative studies could be carried out there in an isolated but convenient location of experimental or model programs for the alteration of undesirable behavior. West said that there were certain factors that militated toward violent behavior, including sex, being male, age, being young, ethnicity, being black, and urbanicity. In a secret memo, he discussed projects that the center might employ in more detail. He said, quote, now, by implanting tiny electrodes deep within the brain, it is even possible to record bioelectrical changes in the brain of freely moving subjects through the use of remote monitoring techniques. They are not yet feasible for large-scale screening that might permit detection of a violent episode. A major task at the center should be to devise such a test. Other techniques that West planned on using on violent offenders at the center included castration by chemicals, drugs for mood manipulation, and brain surgery. The center would collaborate with the California State Police and share a database that would keep track of pre delinquent children in order to treat them before they became delinquents, a foreshadowing of programs currently in operation in Clinton's Goals 2000. I wonder if Goals 2000 is just Common Core or if there's more to it than that and what the other names are as it continues to exist. No doubt. One critic of West was Dr. Isidore Zifferstein, associate clinical professor of psychiatry at the UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute. We have a new situation on our hands, Zifferstein said. Because of the intensifying economic decline, it is inevitable that more and more jobless will go beyond the limits of the law to satisfy their needs. There are probably upwards of 30% of our population who are permanently impoverished. And once these 30% become convinced that the democratic process is not working for them, they become desperate and may resort to violent means. There is a rising radicalism in their midst, and there is an uppityness among the blacks and Chicano prisoners, which prison officials find intolerable. That's such a bad word. To subdue them, the authorities are using new methods. They're employing the psychiatric armamentarium and a new technological tool set, what has become to be known as psychotechnology. Under the guise of therapeutic behavior modification, they're applying anything from the terror drug anectine and other aversive drugs to psychosurgery. Despite Reagan's support, the idea for the Violence Center was tabled. I'm sorry, I loved Reagan so much, and I don't know if he just stayed above it all, but man, there was so much stuff when he was in California or as president that is sketchy AF, but they did immediately try to kill him. So maybe that was simply so HW could be president for his own ego, or maybe this guy couldn't be counted on to absolutely go all the way with everything. Maybe he was just out of touch. They always portrayed him as such, which I realize now could just be cover. But he was so handsome. He was so charming. How can a charming person, of course, that's the essence of the politician. They're charming. That's why you just never met anybody like that before. Despite Reagan's support, the idea was tabled, although he retained the concept of the center in his active file until his election to president. After the demise of the Violence Center, West seems to have moved into the role of a fixer for the CIA, always on the spot for high profile psychiatric intervention, character assassination, or an off the cuff interview when the agency sought damage control. West examined Jack Ruby after the killing of Lee Harvey Oswald and determined that Ruby was in a paranoid state manifested by delusions, visual and auditory hallucinations, and suicidal impulses. This diagnosis was probably influenced by Ruby's insistence that a conspiracy had been responsible for the murder of John F. Kennedy and that Ruby was being troublesome by virtually begging the authorities, including Chief Justice Earl Warren of the Warren Report, to listen to his take on who had done the deed. In correspondence that journalist Lincoln Lawrence had access to, Ruby wrote, "To start my story off, they found some very clever means and ways to trick me. I was used to silence Oswald. I walked into a trap the moment I walked down that ramp Sunday morning." Hmm. Don't we have a picture of him actually shooting Oswald? Is it possible that something else really happened? Ruby also wrote, "The reason I have gone through all the explanation is that knowing of my complete innocence and they're framing me as they have, there certainly was a tremendous motive for it. The old warlords are going to come back. South America is full of these Nazis. They will know that it is only one kind of people that would do such a thing. That would have to be the Nazis, and that is who is in power." Framing him. I mean, I thought we had pictures of it. Maybe we don't really have pictures of it. Maybe a cop shot Oswald and somebody pointed a gun at Ruby and he took his gun out in self-defense. I mean, who knows? And stuff gets, these pictures back, those pictures around the JFK thing got manipulated. If the idea of Nazi involvement in the assassination seems far fetched, then a perusal of the Torbit document would be in order. Torbit document, Torbitt. Ruby finished his letter by saying, "The rest depends upon you. You can be of some help some way. Be careful. They are after my blood. See if my predictions will be correct." Well, he died of cancer soon after. In the end, no one listened to what Ruby had to say, except for journalist Dorothy Kilgallen. I just read a book about her called The Reporter Who Knew Too Much. And I would say the first 3/4 of the book was very good. And it started to get a little boring too speculative after a while. Wow, Dorothy Kilgallen. Yeah. I mean, I just read it. I nicked the book from my mom's house on the way out the door. I've totally lost the ability to talk like my mom. Not totally, but it'll come back. In the end, no one listens to what Ruby had to say except for Kilgallen, who was found suicided shortly after her interview with him. Well, yes, it is possible that she died of an accidental overdose. I don't know. I think that would be the possibility. And I think they might have ruled it a suicide, though. Or, of course, it could have been murder. Probably was. Ruby himself was to die soon after from a cancer that he believed had been injected into him. At the end of his life, West was associated with the Cult Awareness Network, founded by deprogrammer Ted Patrick, who had been an aide to Ronald Reagan at the time that the Violence Center was proposed. Woo! The X-Files reboot season is worth watching, frightening me. It's all about an alien virus called Spartan and a vaccine to stop it. It was just too hard to look at post facelift Gillian Anderson, only because she was so cute and fat when she was young. Government commissions are always cover ups. Yep. Okay, frightening me. Monica, NASA, Nazis, and JFK is the result when searching the Torbit document. I think it goes beyond that. But who are Nazis, I guess, is the question. All right, let's keep going. I got another chapter in me, or two. Chapter 13, Occult Connections. It is difficult to overestimate the role of religion and occultism in the history of world control. I hate that because I love religion. I love my religion. Even though the Pope drinks baby's blood, it's a better way to live. Can you hear that? My house is erupting in some kind of noise. It is difficult to overestimate the role of religion and occultism in the history of world control. This is one means by which zealots are molded who are unable to evaluate effectively and who thus can be turned to the purposes of their controllers. In many religions or occult groups, the zombieism of the mind controlled is the entry fee, and the disposal problem for getting rid of the victims of mind control is not so formidable since cult members have often become disaffected with their former friends and family. A quick scan through cultic history in recent years reveals significant branching connections, a few of which I will cover in this book. A prime instance of CIA involvement in a cult in recent years is the case of Jim Jones' People's Temple. Although nary a word of these dark underpinnings had slipped into mainstream accounts of the group, evangelist Jim Jones started out as a member of Bertrand Russell's Fellowship of Reconciliation, which sponsored him at Butler College in Indianapolis. The fellowship is reported to have financed his first trip to Brazil in 1961. Jones at the time told the Brazilians that he was in the employ of naval intelligence, and both his food and lodging during his stay were provided by the U.S. Embassy. While in Brazil, Jones took regular trips to Belo Horizonte. I've been there. I did a deal for Localiza their rental car agency with the yellow and green um, logo, Belo Horizonte. The location of CIA headquarters in the region and return. That's the location of CIA headquarters? Wow. And returned to the United States with an unexplained $10,000 cash windfall. Apparently, Jones was doing more than missionary work. According to one account, Jones had been part of a CIA effort attempting a government overthrow in South America and distributed leaflets and stirred up revolutionary sentiments during his stay. It is alleged that one of Jones' earliest sources of financing for his work was Rabbi Maurice Davis, who provided him a church in Indianapolis. Davis was on the board of the American Family Foundation, the founding group for the Cult Awareness Network, and worked as a chaplain at the National Institute for Mental Health's infamous Lexington Addiction Research Center, where MK Ultra research had been done. Jones moved his growing fellowship to Ukiah, California, yes, where reports from the disaffected from his group said that behavior modification experiments were performed on the congregation. According to People's Temple researcher Michael Myers, early temple experiments in sensory deprivation are not well documented, but it is known that Jones imparted his expertise to Donald DeFreeze, who utilized the technique to brainwash Patty Hearst. Yes, I've heard that. Also, according to Myers, Tom Grubbs, a psychologist with the University of California, was in charge of the box. Grubbs, who was also principal of the Jonestown School, personally constructed Jones's sensory deprivation chamber. In Ukiah, Jones became chairman of the county grand jury and worked with many wealthy collaborators, including persons connected to military and intelligence agencies. The Jones Group also infiltrated and took over the Mendocino State Hospital as part of a government pilot project to evaluate the feasibility of deinstitutionalizing mental patients. Yeah, that was a crazy thing. That was a crazy thing to do. People blame Reagan for that, but that was, I think, under JFK's watch. After a reduction in state funding, although this is later than that, right? I don't know. After a reduction in state funding for psychiatric institutions, most of the patients at Mendocino were released into the custody of the People's Temple. What? In 1971, the People's Temple relocated to San Francisco, where Jones and many of his followers are said to have smoothly integrated as part of the Jerry Brown political machine. Jones became the head of the San Francisco Housing Commission. What? And used the city welfare department to recruit members for the People's Temple. Among the most important of Jones' supporters were the Layton family, whose head, Dr. Lawrence Laird Layton, had relocated to America from Germany after World War II. Layton had worked on the Manhattan Project and was chief of chemical and ecological warfare research at Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah, where Army LSD research was carried out. Layton's wife, Eva, had worked for the CIA at Berkeley University. According to Dr. Colin Ross, her job at the library was to keep track of all the left-wing literature taken out of the library and the names of the people who took those books out and report that to the CIA. I always try to figure this out because so much socialism was a CIA plot, but I think I read in one of these books, The Money Changers maybe, that in order to counter real communism, like real bring down the system communism, they fomented socialism, like in South America and maybe here too, because socialism was something that gave them more power, not less. I don't know. It's a little mystifying. Another home for Jones' flock was set up in Guyana at the former site of the Shalom Project, allegedly a CIA training camp for guerrillas to be used in operations in Angola between 1973 and 1975. Jones received assistance from the U.S. Embassy in Georgetown, Guyana, which was also the headquarters for the CIA in the area. It has been alleged that all of the members of the embassy in Georgetown were agents of the CIA. At Jonestown, children were kept in line with electric cattle prods. When Congressman Leo Ryan attempted to investigate Jonestown, members of the U.S. Embassy attempted to prevent him. This was finally left up to Jones' followers. The Jonestown deaths were the ultimate in assisted suicides. According to the officiating pathologist in Guyana, 80 to 90% of the victims had fresh needle marks on their bodies. Other victims had been shot or strangled. Orders were sent to U.S. military officials by an aide to National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski to remove all politically sensitive papers and forms of identification from the bodies. Jim Jones may have survived the destruction of the People's Temple compound. The body, identified as being Jim Jones, was so decomposed as to be unidentifiable, although it is reported that the corpse did not have Jones' distinctive chest tattoos. Examining the evidence, the conclusion is simple, inevitable. Jonestown was a project of U.S. intelligence agencies and the psychiatric establishment, and the mass murders or suicides there probably took place to cover that fact up. American media is in collusion in keeping the information from the public. The Esalen Institute, located at Big Sur, is a New Age style group with a myriad of interesting connections. One of the founders of the group was Aldous Huxley, the primary advocate for the LSD dosing of the world. The first seminar on human potential at Esalen, someone mentioned that, I think frightening, is related to Esalen, was led by Willis Harman of Stanford Research Institute, who was anything but a hippie. Charles Manson and members of his group played a concert at Esalen 3 days before the Helter Skelter murders. Physicist Jack Sarfati reports on weird stories that he heard at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur that the occultist philosophy Arica had been founded in Chile by fugitive Nazis who were occult adepts. Sarfati says many of the regulars at Esalen, including some of our group like Dr. John Lilly and Claudio Naranjo, had been in the first Arica training in Chile. Sarfati also lists Soviet officials who were at Esalen in the late 70s and early 80s. Valentin M. Berezhkov, Yuri A. Zamashkin, Andrei A. Kokoshin, Henrikas Zhushkevicius, Vladimir Kuznetsov, Viktor Pogostin, Vlail Kaznachyev, Joseph Golden. This list is not complete. One of the people said to have been involved in the Russian presence at Esalen is the Rockefeller-funded John Mack, formerly on the board of advisors of Werner Erhard's establishment. Mack has lately achieved prominence as a UFO abduction researcher. Donna Bassett, who infiltrated Mack's group, says that he has been funded by an ex-CIA source. The Unification Church of Reverend Sun Myung Moon has since its beginning. He was definitely aligned with George H.W. Bush, and I believe it's behind the Epoch Times. It's been since its beginning maintained close connections to the South Korean CIA. At least 4 of Moon's early acolytes were Army officers closely connected to the founding director of the KCIA. One of Moon's most influential aides, Bo Hai Pak, liaised with the CIA for the KCIA and is said to have made many trips to the National Security Agency at Fort Meade, Maryland. Moon's church is enormously rich and influential, with at least 600 front groups by last count. Among the group's notable acquisitions has been the Washington Times newspaper, which Moon admits has cost him more than $1 billion, and the University of Bridgeport in Connecticut that has hired as a trustee Jack Thomas, former Assistant Chief of Staff for U.S. Air Force Intelligence. On March 23rd through the 25th, 1997, 39 members of a UFO apocalyptic cult group called Heaven's Gate killed themselves with phenobarbital and vodka in the Rancho Santa Fe suburb of San Diego. I know I've told you this before, but I was in business school and law school at Stanford which had nothing to do with the Stanford Research Institute or anything like that. But I had like a strange friend, um, and he just like thought outside the box and whatever. And he dragged me to this little meeting at the Hyatt Ricky's where all these Heaven's Gate people were sitting with purple polo shirts on. And I asked them like what evidence they had that for, to help me understand that they actually have a spaceship coming. And they didn't really convince me, thank God. I mean, I would never have gone in for that stuff, but it was kind of boring there in Palo Alto at that time. It's probably still boring, rich though it may be. Okay. As with many apparent cults, when a thread is pulled, it often leads to the shadowy denizens of American spookdom. In the case of Heaven's Gate, one of these connections is via the internet. The web server for the Heaven's Gate website is a small company, Space Star, staffed by one man in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. Fracturing coincidence, another group that uses the services of Space Star is the Scientific Applications International Corps, or SAIC, CIA's spelled backwards. Doubly coincidental is that SAIC is located in La Jolla, California, near Rancho Santa Fe. Rancho Santa Fe. It's such a sleepy little town. It's a tiny place. That's so weird. I've driven through there just, occasionally taking a weekend. That is so interesting. Wow. It's like Pasadena. Like some of these places are just hotbeds. And San Francisco, the Bay Area, has all those like big tech, big defense. I guess it's just all up and down California's coast. Why? Because the weather's so good? Because it's a launching point for Asia? I don't know. SAIC is the parent company to a group called Network Solutions, which in turn owns a company called InterNIC. That group is in charge of all the website addresses on the internet. The board of directors of SAIC includes NSA Director Bobby Ray Inman, as well as retired U.S. Army General W.A. Downing. Other alum of SAIC include William Casey, former head of the CIA, former CIA Director John Deutsch, former Defense Secretary Melvin Laird, Donald Kerr, former director of Los Alamos National Laboratory, and William Perry, the head of the Department of Defense. SAIC has been involved in remote viewing experimentation with American intelligence agencies for which medical oversight, according to researcher Jim Schnabel, was provided by Louis Jolyon West. Maybe it's good that this book is 25 years old because he has access to all this information and the prescience to actually connect those dots and give us that information. San Diego must be a hotbed of strange research at the edges of American spy biz, since it is also the location for Naval Electronics System Command, who have been reported to have been another one of the funding sources for Hal Puthoff's early remote viewing experiments at Stanford Research Institute. Another interesting connection to Heaven's Gate is alleged by researcher John Judge. Judge has said that the murdered CIA and British intelligence operative Ian Spiro, who lived within a few blocks of the Heaven's Gate group, was also a member of the group. What would be the purpose of putting together and manipulating a group like Heaven's Gate, like People's Temple? Such a group might provide a model for larger societal manipulation. Yes, you can only do so much on an individual in a lab setting. You could use it for the fine-tuning of larger scale new age religious manipulation and perhaps a testing ground for drug or electronic manipulation. Intelligence agencies seem to have infiltrated, interfaced, and created some satanic groups, with the resurgence of groups of this type beginning in 1966 with the birth of the Church of Satan, founded by Anton LaVey. LaVey studied criminology at the San Francisco City College and worked in the crime lab of the SFPD. According to journalist Linda Blood, he maintained a cordial relationship with the SFPD. An associate of LaVey's has also told me that he has personal knowledge that the Satanist also functioned as an informant for Interpol. Prior to the Church of Satan, LaVey ran a group called the Magic Circle, whose members were a surprisingly unsatanic bunch that, according to LaVey biographer Burton Wolfe, included an anthropologist who would hold professorships at Yale, Columbia, and Berkeley, and chair the New School for Social Research. Yes, I've heard of that. A billionaire and accused pederast, a feminist who would go on to direct the National Women's Political Caucus, and a number of San Francisco Police Department employees. The most interesting member of the group is said by Wolf to have been the heir to the Vickers munitions empire. Although I do not know specifically which member of the Vickers family was involved with LaVey, the family background is telling. Sir Peter Vickers Hall is a Fabian socialist, a member of NATO, and alleged to be a senior member of British MI6. His father-in-law, Sir Peter Vickers, worked on the Stanford Research Institute, Changing Images of Man. We were just talking about that. I was just talking about that with Courtney, and that show is coming up. So watch out for it. It's going to be in the second half of October. That project, a definitely Tavistock Institute influenced endeavor, to quote Vickers Hall, reeling off his own one world propaganda. I am perfectly happy working with the Heritage Foundation and groups like that. True Fabians look to the new right to push through some of their more radical ideas. For more than a decade, the British population has been subject to a constant propaganda barrage of how it was on the industrial skids. All of this is true, but the net effect of the propaganda was to demoralize the population. This will happen in the United States as the economy worsens. This demoralizing is necessary to make people accept difficult choices. If there's no planning for the future, or if constituencies block progress, there will be social chaos on a scale which is currently hard to imagine. Well, only because that's how you will make it. The outlook for urban America is bleak. There is a possibility of doing something with the inner cities, but basically the cities will shrink and the manufacturing base will decline. Well, that second part is true. This will produce social convulsions. Michael Aquino was a prominent member of the Church of Satan, who went on to form his own group, the Temple of Set. Aquino, at the time of his entrance into LaVey's group, was an army specialist in intelligence and psychological warfare. In 1973, he became the executive officer of the 306th Psychological Operations Battalion at Fort MacArthur in California. Several other members of the military and military intelligence are alleged to have been involved in the Temple of Set, including a member of the Naval Reserve, a captain in PSYOPs, an intelligence officer, and a reserve army major. Aquino was the guy who armed the Black Panthers, if I'm not mistaken. Aquino and others were alleged to have been involved in child molestation at the Child Development Center at the Army's Presidio in San Francisco, one in a string of abuse investigations of military daycare centers that have taken place in the past by the Army. Investigations of child abuse have taken place at West Point, Fort Dix, Fort Leavenworth, and Fort Jackson. Other daycare centers investigated for allegations of abuse include a Navy daycare center in Philadelphia, where a man was sentenced to 3 years in prison for child abuse, 2 Air Force daycare centers, and a Department of Defense elementary school in Panama. Reporter Linda Goldston describes what she found when she conducted an on-site investigation at the Presidio. Inside a concrete bunker behind the military intelligence building at the Presidio, the words Prince of Darkness are painted boldly in red on one wall. Used decades ago to house artillery guns, the reinforced concrete batteries appear to have been converted to something like ritual chambers. Emblazoned next to the Prince of Darkness is the word die, and what looks like a list of names painted in red that have been crossed out with heavy black paint. One wall is covered with the numeral 666, a sign of the devil and occult drawings. A clearing in the center of the concrete floor, where the ground is exposed, is filled with refuse and partly burned logs. On the front wall beneath the window that faces military intelligence buildings is a huge pentagram inside a circle. In the rear, where sunlight this is the kid stuff? Are you kidding me? In the rear, where sunlight gives way to darkness, white and black candle drippings sit atop a dome-shaped recession in the wall, apparently a crude altar. Incense sticks lie half burned to the side. At another battery farther up Lincoln Boulevard, a large drawing of Satan with red eyes and horns appears on an outside concrete wall. Doors to the battery are secured shut. No entry is possible here. Yikes, yuck, ew. Linda Blood, the new Satanists. Snap. Yeah. There's a lot of footnotes here. Very interesting. Wow, my people, I just read like twice as much as I thought I would do. I want to keep going, but I will literally lose my voice. I think we're done. Chapter 14, Consolidating Control. We're going to do that Monday at 2. 15, Guerrilla Mind War. And then 16 is The Greening of America, Project Monarch. Interesting. All right. So we got some good stuff coming up. This is so interesting. And I know Aquino is the worst. Wolf in sheep's clothing, of course. Here, let's read some more. Interesting. Oh, Frightening was happy for today's stream. Ba, 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 ba. Yes, you're welcome for doing this. I'm happy to do it. It's so fascinating. And it gets me to read because I love to read. And I get to read during the day. If I read in bed or lay down on the couch, I just fall asleep. So it's just great for everybody. However, I will not read a book to you that I haven't already read myself because it's got to be good all the way through the end. And so many books are not good after like 3/4 of the way. Yeah, Frightening says, go look at the Fabian logo. It is literally a wolf in sheep's clothing. Demoralization literally means to get rid of morality, but we think of it as making people sad and unhappy. Hayes says, read the book Fabian Freeway by Rose Martin. I did a full read through on my channel recently. This is Hayes Reviews, Heys, Hayes Reviews. Diversity, inclusivity, and equality, DIE. All right. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you. And all right, so let's wrap it up, and hopefully we'll get back together on Monday at 2:00 Pacific, 5:00 Eastern. And you can always find all these things on the playlists on YouTube or Saturday Story Time on your favorite podcasting platform in the Monica Perez Show feed. Later.